Hey, Simple Passive Cash Flow listeners, Lane Kawoka here. Today we're going to talk about this mobile home park opportunity in Moberly, Missouri. This webinar might get a little long. I think a lot of us, the mobile home park space is a little new to us. A lot of you guys are single family home investors or in some of these apartment investments that we've gone in. And this presentation is going to be split up into a couple segments. I'm going to kind of go over the real high level of the deal, but then I'm going to splice in a webinar that me and Andrew Lanoy did from Four Peaks, who's the operator on this deal, where we kind of talked about the mobile home park space just in general. And then we're going to kind of get into the deal specifics in the Moberly deal. And then I'll kind of cap things off at the end with closing remarks and how you can get in line for this opportunity. So, just the high level here, it's a 77 unit, $1.4 million evaluation. And again, it's Moberly, Missouri. So, if you guys don't know where that is, it's halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri. So, this is an offering as part of crowdfundaloha.com. And this site should be up here in the next month or so. This is going to kind of be the private equity group that I'm going to start to put my deals under, sort of as a side label from Simple Passive Cash Flow, which will continue to be a blog and podcast. Of a lot of my personal feelings are on here, but the crowdfund Aloha is going to be more of that formal private equity group. And I think the goal is that we try and find good investments for hardworking middle class folks like yourself to build real asset portfolios by providing free investing, education, podcasts, and networking. And investments like how we're going to talk today that are not offered to the general public. There's a disclaimer that you guys can read in your spare time. And again, all these documents will be available to you folks via the website, via that with that secret password that'll be in the email out to you. So kind of going over the team, people is a big part of this. The first, I'm partnering with operator that are called Four Peaks, and they are in the mobile home space. And a couple of their, they're basically a dynamic duo with a lot of employees working on it. But it's basically Michael Ayala and Andrew Lanoy here. Now, originally met Mike Ayala probably about a little over a year ago when we hung out in Belize, got to know him, and then I kind of realized, hey, he works with Andrew too. So that was kind of the start of a relationship. And I was always kind of like, hey, let me follow you guys, what you guys are doing. And, because one of my big things and one of my biggest pet peeves is people always pitch you on the first meeting. The way I like to do it is I like to, add me to your list. Let me take a look at your deal flow, and then let me kind of talk to my friends, and let me try and find your investors and kind of do my due diligence that way and start to learn the numbers myself. On the website, I have an article written. It's essentially an article. What are the steps that I went the last 6 months to kind of learn um, this different asset class? And it's not apartments, but at the end of the day, it's things are very similar. And we'll kind of go over a lot of the highlights in this webinar. But Mike Ayala's he's got the dirty boots next there. He's the boots on the ground. He's the chief operating officer. He's really the guy who gets his hands dirty with this. Andrew Lanoy, who's going to be in a lot of the upcoming webinars here in a bit. I'll bring him on. He's kind of the founder and chief executive officer. He started a turnkey company back in 2009, and he believes in this mobile home park asset class, which is why he's kind of switched his business to do more of this mobile home park space. So if the guy's going to move his business, I mean, he believes in it, and there's another reason. There's another reason why, you, as an investor, as an LP, that you should kind of take notice. Here's some of Four Peaks' track record. These guys aren't new operators. They've got a bunch of properties all over the place, and their idea is they try and cluster it in areas so they can get economies of scales. Because one of their big legs up is that they have these construction companies that are in house. So a lot of this is not third party where you pay big prices. But I will we'll try and go over this in a couple segments. And first segment is going to be on mobile home parks in general, and then we'll kind of talk about the deals specifically. But here's the executive summary on the deal that we're going to be talking about. 77 spaces. There are 25 resident-owned homes, 3 rent-to-own properties, and majority 40 vacant lots. Purchase price was $225,000, which is just extremely low. And it's already been purchased. You know, it's all, so your money's going to go directly right into the business right here, and just get infused right in. Trying to raise about $1.4 million, get about 400 or 500 of it raised already. So this thing is kind of going fast here, and no leverage is used. It's very simple transaction, and that's kind of the highlights. But yeah, we'll get into the first learning about mobile home parks, so you guys can get a sense of the asset class, and then we'll talk about the deal. Kind of the deck on the overview on mobile home park investing. A lot of them, my investors, we've done apartments, we've done single family homes, and this is just another little twist on investing. Just like how non-performing note investors is just a little different. So I'll kind of let you drive here and kind of take us through this deck.
Great. Thanks, Lane. I appreciate you just setting this up for everyone. So I guess we'll start with just a little quick overview on my company. It's Four Peaks Capital Partners. We're specifically laser focused on investing in mobile home communities in the United States right now. And our mission is to create and preserve the wealth of an exclusive group of investors with a tangible investment alternative to the stock market. So let's get right into it. I had some success investing outside of Wall Street, and friends and family and colleagues started asking me. I worked at a company called the William Morris Agency, and I had some friends and family started to ask me if they could invest with me. And so after doing quite a few deals, it was all in the single family space, decided to put together an investment company which would allow others to invest with myself and my team.
This is basically the turnkey company, right? It's just
it was exactly right. And it started, we were doing deals in Dallas, and then Memphis, and then Atlanta, and put a turnkey company together in Atlanta with some partners. And we were, buying C-class in the kind of the southern part of Atlanta. And this started back in 2009, started buying. So, like anything else, hindsight being 2020, it was a pretty great time to be investing in single families back there, just because of the market cycle and after the subprime crash. So a lot of our investors are looking for income, and some are looking for growth, and some are looking to build international or generational wealth and leave a legacy behind. We found an investment that provides both income and growth, as well as preservation of capital. And so we're going to go through that now. But let's start by identifying a few of the problems that most investors face each day. And the first is really yield. It's incredibly difficult to find yield these days, whether it's in the multifamily space or whether it's in commercial or single family. There's a lot of folks that Lane and I both know in a lot of different asset classes, and it's certainly getting trickier and trickier to find yield these days. There's deals out there, but I feel like it's getting harder to find. The second thing is most of our investors are really busy. They're not looking for another job. They're not out looking to swing the hammer and flip the houses themselves or become an operator. They're really looking for passive, stable income. And of course, we're all concerned with the volatility in the stock market. And my goal since 2008 has really been to get all of my money out of the stock market, which I did. And it's certainly pretty volatile. And so, we're all trying to diversify into tangible investments that we know and understand. So speaking of the stock market, Does anyone remember what happened earlier this year?
I know Facebook just plunged, what, like last week, right? I mean, how?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting to track this stuff, but obviously the stock market's pretty cyclical. But the Dow dropped over 1,100 points earlier this year, and essentially just erasing a lot of the gains from the previous years. So there's just a couple clips from some of the headlines from that time.
Yeah, and what I don't like is like all these headlines, like, it's English. English majors will tell you you can write whatever you want as long as you back it up. So, but nobody knows
Yeah,
if these headlines are really true, if they're.
sure. I mean, that's a whole other webinar too, right? So, aside from the volatility and feeling like you're completely in the dark, you typically don't know anything about investments into Wall Street until you sell, and typically you're very few that have actual distributions or cash flow to these. So next, let's talk about Bitcoin a little bit. Looks like this froze on me here. Yeah. And let's talk about Bitcoin for a second. So I've had friends, I think we've all had friends who have invested in crypto. And while I can definitely understand the excitement from the gains, there's a lot of people who have lost money, and crypto does not provide income currently. I think now Bitcoin was, last time I checked, was somewhere around $10,000. Um, and let's talk about, actually, here's an interesting chart that I found on Bitcoin from 2014 to 18. Let's move over to gold for a second. So certainly gold can be considered a hedge against inflation, but still there's no income, generally speaking. So the challenge is to provide stable passive income and growth, and we found that through real estate and specifically in acquiring mobile home communities. And speaking of mobile home parks, here's an interesting graph to check out. So essentially, I'll just read this. So, manufacturer housing is one of the most recession resistant sectors of the housing and commercial real estate sector, and consistently outperformed multifamily in the same site NOI growth since 2000. Since 2000, so you've got if everyone looks right around 2008 here, you'll see that everything else kind of took a dip in these asset classes, which include apartment, industrial, self storage, strip mall office, malls, and manufactured housing rode through that and was very stable through the last correction. Let's take a look here. Lane, can you pause it for a second?
Yeah.
So, as I was saying, mobile home parks is one of the asset classes that did not lose recession, did not lose value or income in the last recession. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but essentially, when there's a recession, people lose jobs. They have less cash. Someone living in a nice apartment is potentially going to move to a less expensive apartment. They're not necessarily homeless. Residents in low income apartments move to mobile homes. And after that, there's really not very many places to go. So you kind of have a top to bottom effect on this. My
Right.
partner and I, my partner and who's the CEO of my company, Mike Iella, he's owned parks since 2006. And one of the first questions I asked him was, well, what happened during the recession with the parks you owned? And he said most of them didn't change, and a few actually did better during the downturn of 2007, 2008. One of the most interesting stats that we talk about is that 50% of wage earners in the U.S. make $30,000 or less a year, which is a pretty staggering statistic. And most of our residents fall into that category. I think our lot rents are typically in the $200 to $300 a month range. So that's a pretty eye opening statistic.
And I think a lot of you guys have seen the slide that I have, where I have all the class A, B, C, D houses, and we kind of run the scenario where if there's a recession, the A class are going to get killed, right? Like these are like the luxury condos. A lot of those people are going to have to move down to the Bs, and then the Bs are going to have to move down to the Cs, and the Cs are going to have to move to the Ds. But I think that was the great appeal with apartments, and it still is, right? If you're staying in this B class, C class area.
Sure.
But what we're trying to do here with the mobile home parks is catch the bottom with an asset that they're not making any more of.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you think about what happened in the subprime crash. A lot of, kind of back to your point about the A class, a lot of the people that got hurt were either they had too many projects up in the air where they were flipping homes, or when a crash happens, typically the cranes stop moving. Right, you go to a market where um, the lending dries up, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of cranes in the air that are building new construction. So I mean, that's we're certainly in the very opposite end of that spectrum. Let's see here.
And a lot of the class C apartments, your typical tenants paying, I don't know, like 500-600 bucks a month. They've got a okay job for like a blue collar worker. And if when the recession happens, a lot of those guys are going to get laid off, and and this is kind of where they're going to fall to in
Right.
a way.
Yeah, and I've said it before, but our residents we're not really competing with the single family market there. Our residents don't have the income or FICO score or savings to go buy a single family house. They certainly wouldn't qualify for that. So this is really they're going to go rent an apartment, or they're going to buy a manufactured home through one of our programs and a few of the lenders that are out there in this space.
Right. And it's D class, but it's not really D class as you think of it, because normally D class is war zone, and I think some of the pictures we'll go through will kind of show it. Maybe D class star, I don't know what we'd call it, but
Yeah, and they're definitely, it's more on a star, a star rating, like a 1 to 5 star, instead of classes like apartments and single family. Let's take a look here. So I just thought this is interesting. This is just a graph I pulled from Tiger 21 on their allocations, and obviously real estate is a portion, huge portion of this. And as we know, at least through what Lane teaches and what we're working on, is most affluent investors want to have a good percentage of their portfolio in real estate. Um, let's talk about one of our partners. So last year we had the good fortune to partner up with Warren Buffett, who's very active in this space. He owns a couple different companies. One is Clayton Homes, and Clayton is the largest manufacturer in the United States. So they have manufacturing plants all over the United States, making the manufactured homes. And then 21st Mortgage has about $8 billion out, and they do the financing on these loans. And they say they've got about a 5% default rate. I think their average FICO is about in the mid fives. So they're heavily invested in this space. And what's interesting is when they're looking at a resident profile or a potential resident profile, they're not looking at, did that person have a bankruptcy 6 years ago? It's more about, have they had a job, and have they been paying their rent on time, and things like that. Of course, they factor everything in, but that's pretty interesting, though. So let's talk about specifically why myself and the team chose mobile home parks. We currently own about, I think we're at somewhere around 1,800 units in about 12 states that we operate in. And I guess the first thing is single family homes. And back to what Lane and I were talking about earlier, I bought over 100 single family homes with partners starting in 2009. So I really understood that market. I was operating in multiple states. Most of them were buy and hold. We did some flips in the turnkey company, but single families are getting scooped up by homeowners. Interest rates are still relatively low. And as an investor, if you own a single family and your tenant moves out, you are 100% vacant and you have no income coming in to pay any of the expenses in that scenario. So not only do I feel like we're at the top of the market for single family, but we're also it's risky when you look at it from that perspective. If you've got one single family home and you're vacant, you have zero income to pay expenses. So, and I feel it's also very fragmented with, you're looking to build a portfolio of units spread over multiple states and multiple markets. And also the cost per door is one of the highest compared to other types of housing.
In my point of view, I see all the new investors coming in, and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna buy a single family home," and it's like, "Okay, you're 10 years too late, buddy." Right? Like,
Yeah.
I know you've been sitting on the sideline for a decade, and now's the time to get in. It's a little bit too late, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there certainly will be another correction coming, and we'll see what happens after the correction. If that opens up some more opportunities, which typically it does. Um, and so, just really quick on multifamily. I think we've all seen hedge funds and institutional players grabbing up tons of these assets in the past almost 10 years now from the correction. And so it's harder and harder to find deals. And I know, Lane, you're in this space, and the deals are still out there. I think there's just less of them, and probably more people chasing it, and probably, arguably, some not so smart money being thrown around in this space, which could be an opportunity for these things to get put back on the market at some point. But certainly a lot of money in the multifamily space.
right, right. And I think if I were to kind of, you know, choose my words wisely, it's still a great space. I mean, the asset class, I mean, class B and C is kind of where you want to be. But the problem is all these investors are kind of getting, outgrowing single family homes. So the logical progression is to go to multifamily as operator, and it's just becoming a very crowded space. So there are good deals out there if you know how to spot them, if you can run the numbers yourself and bet the operators yourself. But I mean, it's just becoming a little bit of just too many people running around with their heads chopped off.
Right, right. And obviously, we've seen pretty massive cap rate compression in this space over the past few years, and I know a few operators that have north of 10,000 units, and most of them are not buying and some are selling. So that gives you some indication of where we are on the market cycle. And Lane's point, there's definitely deals out there in any part of the cycle, and if you know what you're doing, you know how to source deals, and they're still out there. But if some of that window feels like it's closing. And onto retail, which is interesting. So we've all seen some of the biggest names in traditional retail close in the past few years, and really just a decrease in sales and increased competition. We've all seen kind of what Amazon has been doing and growing, and so um, them going out of business means they can't pay their rent. So as someone who owns commercial assets, renting to someone like a Circuit City or someone like a Best Buy. Obviously, Best Buy is still in business. There's certainly some risk there with just where everything's going, especially with just how dominant um, Amazon has been in the space.
Right. Toys R Us. I think Macy's is going out of
Toys R
business.
Us. Yep, I've definitely heard that. Companies like Gap, and I mean, there's a lot of them that it'll be interesting to see in 10 years from now where some of those companies are. Um, so we all also looked around at some other businesses and other asset classes, but really what we found is that mobile home parks were still strong cap rates, and really offering us what our investors are looking for, which is recession resistant income and growth. So let's talk about the opportunity a little bit. And our target when we're acquiring mobile home parks, and we're almost in a niche within a niche, but we're looking at distressed parks at a great discount where we can add massive value. So as an example, most of the communities that we're purchasing today are between about 50 and 80% occupied. Cap rates, we've seen some cap rate compression, and I don't think it's as bad as other asset classes, but we're still buying in like the 7 to 10 cap range, maybe a little bit more if it's a kind of a mom and pop deal, but certainly portfolios and Um, any kind of broker deals are kind of in that range. And generally, when you're buying something in the 50, 60, 70% vacancy range, you're going to run into the same group of problems. And a lot of it's just simply mismanagement. It could be an owner that's owned the community for 30 years and has run out of money, or has a daughter that's stealing, or has living outside of the country, or has run into some health issues, and they're just tired of managing these assets. So these folks are definitely not professional landlords in most cases, and we lovingly call them kind of the mom and pops. But they've been doing it. May have been built in the 50s or 60s and handed down through generations. We've certainly seen a lot of that. So,
And is that like the typical mom pop progression? Is like a lot of these guys inherit land or just get a plot of land that's next to a highway, and then they're like, well, they get this idea of, hey, we can just make spaces, mow the lawn, and then put their homes on. Because I mean, go into the business plan a little bit, but you don't own the homes. Is that kind of why there's so many mom and pop investors that you can kind of buy from, and when they
I
screw up?
think that, I mean, I've only talked to a handful of people that were, a lot of the communities in the U.S. were built in the 50s and 60s, and some in the 70s. Um, it's interesting. I've only talked to one person who actually built communities that long ago, and a lot of them, I think there needs to be some level of sophistication when you're building these things, because you're running infrastructure, water, sewer, the pads that you have, which these homes sit on, they're not really, and it's a bit of a misnomer, they're not really mobile. These things are brought in on flatbed trucks. So you're talking about something being brought in and put down, and you're running water, sewer, and power to it. So, I mean, there's definitely a level of sophistication there as far as building a park. Um, so it's an interesting question. I don't know, but just from our experience, I think it's mostly been people that have kind of inherited them or took something over and just realized they didn't realize what they were getting into, and all of a sudden they're managing a community with 100 homes, and having to deal with the collections, and no systems in place, and no processes, and just like anything else that's running a business. So
Mm.
it's interesting, but it's kind of across the board is kind of the profile that we've seen from the different sellers. Let's see here. So, I guess just to finish up this slide, by increasing occupancy, improving infrastructure, and returning pride of ownership to the residents, we're creating a better living experience at the communities. That's the biggest thing too, which is an interesting point. When you've got a community that started out at 100% occupancy, and 10 years later it's down to 65%, and generally it's someone's run out of money or they're mismanaging it. But it's a big impact on the communities and just the morale of the communities. Um, so that's one of the first things that we do, even when we're in contract, is putting together a turnaround plan or a transition plan. And it could be as simple as just putting in a little putting in a little park, a swing set, a barbecue area. I mean, these things are not that expensive, but you're trying to return the the sense of community to these parks, and also pride of ownership. So that's been a big piece of this for us. Just to talk about our team a little bit, we're somewhere in the neighborhood right now of about 110 W-2 employees. We have an office here in Phoenix, Arizona, and essentially we've got a property management company, which includes the managers and the maintenance at the local level or the community level. We've got a construction company which moves around. I think we've got about five crews out right now, and they move around from park to park, and they renovate the units that end up selling to the residents, which is our model. We don't want our residents to rent, although we have a very small percentage that rent. Ideally, we want that resident to own their home, and it kind of goes back to the pride of ownership, and also the expense ratios are a lot lower when someone is owning their home versus renting. And just imagine anything that happens on inside the four walls of a home is really up to the residents to fix that, not us. So it helps with our expense ratios overall. We've got a marketing team, and essentially when the home is ready or getting ready in terms of just punch list items, then the marketing team takes over and takes pictures and markets it, whether it's print or online or both, depending on the market. Because again, we're selling these homes, so it's a completely different process than if we were just renting them. And we have several people full time in our acquisition department that are looking at deals each day, things that are on the market, off market, broker relationships, direct mail, just kind of all the usual outlets. And then really everyone at the various departments help with due diligence, whether it's property management looking at expense ratios and certain line items, or construction company that's bidding out on how much it's going to cost to renovate these homes, or bringing in new homes, which is a big part of our process too.
So that construction company, how much of that is how much of the work is like third party contractors or in house? Like what's the
Majority is in house. We've got. I'll give you an example. In the state of North Carolina, we have to bid out electrical and a few things. So sometimes electrical will get bid out, but generally when we're renovating a home, let's say I think our average cost right now is about 10 to 10,500 for a full renovation on a manufactured home, and it's literally brand new everything. It's brand new, subfloor to flooring to kitchens to appliances to electrical. And a lot of that we'll do in house with the team. So we've got a supervisor, which is typically hired in Phoenix. Then they'll go out and they'll build a local team of carpenters and laborers. They may sub out electrical and things like that. Just depends on the market, but the majority is all in house. I think we're probably at maybe 40 people on the construction team right now who are W-2 employees.
right. So the key difference between apartments. I mean, usually when apartments, you're kind of going in with third party contractors to get a lot of the rehab done.
Yep. And, and, and part of the reason too is we're operating. I mean, we're in 20 some odd markets in 12 states currently, and we're expanding pretty rapidly. This is a really difficult asset class to manage. So if you're buying apartment buildings in Dallas, Texas, there's you've got a line out the door people who will manage those, whether it's on the asset management, on the property management, construction, contractors. But we're in so many markets that we had to build that out for ourselves. And the same thing if we were in a market in Alabama, there's no easy button just to call someone to go renovate these things. I mean, you might as well just write a blank check to them, right? So I'll talk a little bit about kind of our process, and it typically starts once we have a deal that comes in. What we'll do is we'll first analyze the market and just see if it fits our box. We're focused on tertiary and secondary markets. Generally, anything that's in a major market is going to be overpriced, and not a ton of mobile home communities in major markets. They're really more in secondary and tertiary. So we look at the market. We look at which direction it's going in. We're looking at what are the major job drivers. We typically pass on anything that's kind of what we call a one horse town, where there's a meat packing plant 20 miles away and that's the only job driver. We generally need the mid box and big box, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, and multiple of those, because back to the statistics that 50% of wage earners are making $30,000 or less. That's generally our residents are working at gas stations to Walmarts to Home Depots, et cetera, et cetera. So once we get through the due diligence and we're in the when we contract it, then we've got the team looking at all the different aspects of the deal, running a transition plan, pro forma projections, et cetera. And then the closing, and that's essentially when we close is when the business plan is then handed off to the operations team, who then takes over from there, and everything starts from ordering new homes to fixing the lots that need homes to be ordered on, to putting a calendar together of when a renovation crew is going to go out and start renovating those homes. We order a lot of our new homes from Clayton. typically $35,000 to $50,000 is the retail price for a home that's set. Residents going to pay 5 to 10% down, typically financed through 21st. We do some of our own financing, and we've got another lender that does some financing too. So we have uh, at least three options for the residents, and part of it just depends on their what they can what they can afford and what they can qualify for. We
So,
also sell. Yeah,
so
were
in a
you
way,
going to?
are you guys kind of like a car dealership? Think about it like that.
Yeah, it's the same mentality. I mean, you're going to look at sticker price, but it all boils down to the monthly payment. And it's a really good point. So if you've got a $40,000 brand new home that's set, and let's say that 21st mortgage finances it, you're looking at 5 to 10% down. Their rates are, I think, 7 to 12% depending on the resident. And ultimately, and they'll do longer AMs. They'll do maybe a 20-year amortization. So you're looking at, if let's say your lot rent is $250, you're looking at another $250 or so, maybe three, maybe 225, depending on the home, in a monthly cost to own your home. So you're still, $400 to $600 all in if you're paying for a home in these markets, which is
So like a
still pretty
PITI
reasonable.
for them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all about the monthly payments. I mean, if these folks could afford $2,000 a month, they go buy a really nice house, but they can't. So it's more in line with what a two-bedroom apartment would rent for in some of these markets.
And then where you guys are picking up the properties from kind of in the beginning, is it mostly mom and pa's sellers? And how are you guys reaching out to them? Is it direct mail or
Yep, we'll do direct mail. We work with, I mean, it's really, we're looking at deals that are on the market, that are off the market. We've done direct mail. um, I mean, it's really, I don't know what the largest percentage is, but it's probably equal parts of kind of off market and on market deals. So we're looking at everything we can to keep the pipeline going. Just here's a couple quick pictures of some of the renovations that we've done. A lot of the homes that were built in the 70s, um, they need a full renovation done, which goes back to that. It's about $10 or $11,000 for a full renovation. I think the average is about 10.5. And so again, we go in and it's kind of soup to nuts. It's subflooring to new appliances, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the time, it's not very. It's rental finishes on everything, in order to really keep that price point down. Part of the reason that we spend so much time and money and energy on renovating used homes is we have a product at 15 or $20,000 for the residents. The new homes are typically about 35 to 50. And one of the challenges in this space is just simply residents coming out of pocket for a down payment. So if you've got a $50,000 home at 10%, that's $5,000. And a lot of these folks are just not sitting on $5,000, but 10% of $20,000 or 5% of $20,000, obviously a lot more manageable. So we have both options for these residents.
and that's what you guys are keeping in escrow as kind of the collateral so that these guys just don't get their buddy with a truck to run away overnight, right?
Yeah, so let's say someone comes in and they're buying a new home at $40,000 and they put $10,000 down, and let's just say it's 7 months into their ownership and something's happened. They've lost their job. They've had a big medical bill. Something's happened that's kind of turned their life upside down, and we can't work out a deal with them. Whatever that down payment is, if that's 10% of 40,000, we're sitting on $4,000 that essentially will cover that rent payment for 4 to 8 months, kind of depending on where that is. So that's kind of an insurance for us. And we all know renters typically don't treat properties as well as owners do. So it's part of it's the psychology, and part of it's just simply they have skin in the game. I think that really wraps up kind of the overview of what we're what we're doing. Lane, did you have any other questions or anything else you wanted me to cover on
Yeah,
the
well,
public
I have
housing
one
theme?
question. In terms of the grand scheme of things, with how many people would you say are living in mobile home parks compared to Class B or C apartments? I mean, it's like a drop in the bucket, right? Like 5%, 10%. It's
Yeah, it's a good
microscopic, right?
yeah, it's a good question. The this is it, the, manufactured housing in general is a very fragmented asset class too. I mean, they're not even sure the exact amount of communities there are in the United States. I mean, I've heard everything from as low as 30,000 to 60,000 communities in the United States, and obviously, it's just like apartments. I mean, you've got communities that are 10 spaces, you've got communities that are 700 spaces, so you've got a pretty wide range. So it's something we're looking more into, but the stats are really hard to find on this compared to multifamily or single family.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things where, you mentioned that a lot of the primary markets, you got to be crazy to permit a new mobile home park nearby. I mean, it's like permitting a landfill in a way.
Yeah, it's too bad because there's such a massive demand for affordable housing in the US today, and a lot of municipalities and cities, they don't want communities, they don't want mobile home parks in their area, whether they think it's in the path of progress, or it's an eyesore, or there's just some negativity along with it. But there's a big problem. There's just not enough affordable housing, and it's not getting any better. So
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, once you have a park, I mean, you're fine, you're grandfathered in. But for these people, these mom and pop sellers selling them, getting out of the business, it's going to be going away, and a lot of people need these kinds of homes to live in. I know when I worked for the railroad, a lot of my staff, they had pretty good jobs actually. They were making 50 grand a year, 60 grand a year, but a lot of them lived in these kinds of homes, and it
right,
kind of dumbfounded me. And you get into conversations with these guys. I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I do it, actually. But like they're like, well, I'm retiring next year. I'm 62, and I have $50,000 saved. I'm in pretty good shape. All right, I mean, what's
yeah,
your plan? And a
right,
lot of these guys are going to sell the house that they haven't paid off yet, get a
right,
little RV, or go live in a mobile home park, and that's happiness to them. That's
yeah,
what they want.
yeah. Well, the story I tell, and I saw an article in somewhere that talked about if you're making any less than $117,000 in the Bay Area and the San Francisco area, you're essentially in poverty, which is it's astounding. Um, but my grandfather, who grew up in lower middle class, had three kids and owned a home and owned a car and put him through college on one salary, and those days are gone. So I remember, even in our residence, I mean, you're talking about if there's a mom and dad in the household, generally they're working one to two jobs each, and they're barely getting by. So, I mean, we all know expenses and the cost of living has skyrocketed over the years, and salaries just aren't simply keeping up with it. So, I mean, that's kind of the core problem.
Yeah, talk about the foundation a little bit. I think it kind of hits home when like just a couple $1,000s is hard to come by. And I think it's a big, just buying $1,000 rent homes is a big culture shock to a lot of the folks. I mean, I think this is getting a little bit more. This is just taking another step further, but this is the reality, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times, it's like these folks, and I can't remember the number. It's like 60 some odd percent of wage earners have it's either less than 1,000 or $2,000 in savings, right? Which is another it's just an eye opening statistic. Um, and so these folks will maybe have some extra money around tax time if they get some cash back on their refunds. But that's a problem across the board. It's something that we're facing, that everyone in this industry and really anyone in affordable housing is facing, is coming up with a down payment for these homes. And on one side you've got, if someone's not putting money into a home, then you're really in the psychology is you're a renter, right? And we know, just statistically, renters are going to not treat their home as well as an owner. Um, So we've got a foundation that's launching. I think it's going to be out in Q4 of this year, where at least initially we're gonna help communities and families and individuals in our communities who are basically are going through a financial hardship. So it could be someone's been renting, or someone's been rather a resident's been paying their lot rent on time and making their payments on their home on time for 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden something happens and it's a medical bill, they lose their job or something that just kind of starts to unravel their life. And so depending on the situation, we would step in and help them with some financial assistance through that time. It could be a down payment on a home, it could be an existing resident. So it seems like that's a really good place to start, at least in our community, because there's just so many people who need help out there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's good. It's good. I mean, what's kind of the thought? Like a few thousand, like microloans, right? Like a couple $1,000 or.
Yeah, it's either there's a lot of ways to do it, and there's a lot of red tape, as you can imagine. But it could be a microloan, it could be a no interest loan, it could be just simply a donation. We would essentially be taking in money to the foundation that would get deployed into different ways. So I think it's one of those things that we would play around with a bunch of different models and see what works. But it's a lot of moving pieces in each state, so we're working through all that right now.
Yeah, and I hear you on this. I mean, when I was a construction supervisor, you start to understand that, yeah, the guy is 40, 50, 60 years old, but it's just kind of a little kid in the grown man's body, and they don't understand finances, and this is the kind of stuff that, they need help on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, making good mobile home parks for these folks is definitely makes sense as an investor. And again, it's kind of the right thing to do too. This is just a under huge part of the population. And if you guys got any questions, reach out to Andrew. Get your email out there, Andrew.
Sure. Yeah, our email is investors at fourpeakspartners.com.
All right. All right, we'll cut this webinar short. We're gonna go talk about the deal that we're doing, and we'll see you guys next time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lane.
Here, we're going to talk about the opportunity in Moberly, Missouri, with this mobile home park. I got Andrew Lanoy here from Four Peaks. People always ask, like, how'd you find these deals? Andrew's in the same one of my masterminds I'm in. I met his partner Mike in Belize one time, so we kind of met there. And I was always kind of telling Andrew, a lot of my investors, they want that direct single asset LLC so they can kind of keep tabs on it, learn along the way. And hey, we finally found one for you guys. So kind of go through it really quickly, probably about next 20-30 minutes or so, and talk through a lot of the deal specifics on this one.
Great. Perfect. Thanks for putting this together, Lane. I think this will be pretty short and sweet, and we'll just go through any questions as we go through this together. We currently own, I think, about 4 or 5 different communities in Missouri right now. We're very bullish on the Midwest, and that's been our target area geographically, is Midwest into the Southeast. So we start to get economies of scale in terms of regional managers and clustering of assets in that area. So we own quite a few in Missouri, and we like the area, and the cost of land is inexpensive, which is a big part of the acquisition. When we're running numbers on these things, it's when you're valuing a mobile home community, it's really just based on income and expenses, and that obviously gets you to your cap rate. So being in a state where land is inexpensive is a good thing. So
just so the folks know, how many parks are you guys in now, and where you guys kind of clustered around the United States?
Yeah, so definitely in Midwest and getting into the Southeast is really our main area. We don't want to be in we don't want to operate in every state in the country. Some states just don't make very much sense, like California and New York, and landlord and tenant laws and things like that. So Midwest has been really solid. We're generally in secondary and tertiary markets, and we're not finding great deals in big metros. So generally, these secondary markets work really well for us. I think as of to date, I think we're up to about 28 communities. It's somewhere around 1,800 total lots and operating in 12 states. So that's kind of where we're at, and we should be adding probably another 1,000 units or so this year and over the next 5 or 6 months. So we've had a pretty heavy acquisition year, and plan on plan on continuing to acquire more and more while the deals are still good, and we're buying at pretty decent cap rates.
So I think the question a lot of people ask is, how did you find the deal? Where did this particular one come from?
Yeah, and this was an off market. This came in, I believe, through direct mail. And there's a pretty strong percentage of stuff that we've bought that have been off market deals. I think what's interesting too is, especially when you have more and more assets in one area or one state, then you've kind of got more boots on the ground there, and more people that might drive by something that might be for sale that might not end up on any of the platforms online that you might see. So I think this one was an off market deal, and for 77 spaces and $225,000, it's certainly a pretty compelling deal, just price per lot wise. So on this slide, we'll just do a quick overview of the property. It's 77 total spaces. We've got 25 resident owned homes, and that simply means that those folks are live there. They're paying lot rent, and they may be paying rent. They may be paying making a payment on to a home to someone, or they could own it free and clear. And our model, which I had mentioned before, is really we want our residents to own their own homes and not be a renter. We do have some communities in a small percentage that are renters, but generally we want the majority to be owners. So there's three rent to own or rental units here, and ideally those will be converted to owners, whether it's converting the existing tenant or simply remarketing that home if it needs to be renovated or not. Then there's 9 vacant park-owned homes, including 3 homes that were just brought in recently. And then there's 40 vacant lots, which is the big upside here. And then there's one stick built, one kind of brick and mortar home there that's being rented as well. So it's $225,000 purchase price, very, very low per lot cost. Typically, we've been buying things at ten to $22,000 per lot. Just really quick indicator when we're looking at these communities, and this is obviously a lot lower at 77 spaces and 225,000. This is a cash purchase going in, and that's kind of the broad strokes on the overview.
Yeah, so a lot of you guys, the high notes are, not using leverage on this. We're going to raise the whole thing, and there's a big capex budget which we're raising too. But this is ideal just to get the wheels spinning. This is ideal for a self-directed IRA. Normally, when you go into a investment with a self-directed IRA, you got to worry about the UDF high tax and all that kind of stuff. But no leverage used in that one, so you don't really have to worry about that. And I've got on the website a little info page on mobile home parks for kind of the newbie, and I was kind of in that space when I started to look at this 6 months ago, and I kind of put down some of the resources that I use to go about learning this stuff. But as I think that's one of the main epiphanies when I first started looking at this is you don't really want to own the houses. You want the residents to own a house because you want pride of ownership, and it's just cheaper, right? Like less infrastructure. for you to kind of take care of.
Yeah, and it's so simple to think of it too. You've got a manufactured home that someone owns and lives in. So when their stove breaks or their cabinet door falls off or whatever happens, that's on them as an owner. They own that home. So it goes back to what you were saying. The expense ratios are typically much lower in a resident owned model versus a rental model. It's actually it's a cost of time and energy too, because it's just a lot easier to manage when the residents own their own
Yeah.
homes.
And this might be a little bit too nuancy, but if you kind of go back to the last slide, we've got about a handful. It's kind of a hodgepodge here, as it is most times when you take over a building or investment like this. You got 25 of those. Um, you got some of these existing houses. Like, how are your thoughts? And like, do you try and phase those out as the years go by, or
Which
people normally?
which part?
So 25 resident owned houses, but then there's some of these that like a stick build. Is that kind of that someone purchased or?
Yeah, so that was built. The stick built, I believe, was built when the park was built. So I mean, it's a home that's there. Um, I can't remember what the capex numbers. I think it's currently rented, but we'll keep that and we'll continue to rent it, and that rent just goes into the pot in terms of just the total rental income. But you're right, when we take over a community, typically there's always kind of a hodgepodge of different models. There's usually some rentals. There's always some open spaces, at least in the ones that we're doing, which is really the big upside for us. And then you've got some residents that have lived there for 15, 20, 10, 30 years. Some of them just own their home free and clear, and they've been in the community forever. And they may not be making a payment on to the home. I guess the common thread through here is everyone's paying a lot rent, which is really our core business. So whether you're paying a monthly fee to own your home in addition to the lot rent, everyone's paying lot rent here, and that's really our core business.
Right. And so like a lot of like the park owned homes that'll be kind of phased out or naturally as natural.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. So what happens? So we bought a few communities in outside of Knoxville last year, and I think it was 125 spaces between two communities, and I think there were 80 in the high 80s, maybe 80, 85, 90 rental homes. So that means that someone's paying a lot rent each month. In this case, it was $200, I believe, and it should have been closer to 300. And then they're paying an additional amount to rent their home. So everyone in a mobile home community is going to pay a lot rent, and then they may have a cost of either renting or owning a home, or they may own it free and clear, depending on the situation. So it's actually pretty simple. Everyone's in a lot rent lease there. So with these folks that are in the rent to own there, they're either going to be converted into owners. In the case that it may be just a rental contract, when their rental contract is up, they have the option of owning that home, and we, give them terms to own that home. And if they're not interested in owning it, then they simply move out of the home, and we go market that home to an owner. Because again, our core model is we really want people to own the homes in these situations.
Well,
So we'll just do a quick overview um, on Moberly here. The town was founded in 1866. It had the title of the Magic City, and it's the largest city in Randolph County. And just like Lane said, it's kind of between Kansas City and St. Louis. It's just north of Columbia, where there's a pretty large military base there and some colleges. Um, and so again, this fits kind of our core acquisition targets. As far as secondary and tertiary markets. We'll get into kind of the local demo a little bit too.
definitely don't want to be buying single family homes or. apartment complexes in this town, but it's perfect for mobile home parks.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're buying, I mean, we have kind of a different set of, different lens that we're looking at. Um, so specifically, this community, it's 6 miles from downtown Moberly. It's close to a Walmart. It's close to a Lowe's. It's close to a McDonald's. It's close to a pretty large regional medical center, shopping centers. Um, and those are all things that we look for. It's multiple job drivers. I think I'd mentioned before that we don't want to be in an area where 23 miles away there's a meat packing plant and there's no Lowe's, no Walmarts, no anything else. It's kind of what we call a one horse town, and you've got a big risk of being in trouble if you've got one major job driver and that goes away if the meat packing plant closes. That's a pretty big deal. So we stay away from those areas. We don't need IBM to be there. We don't need this booming metropolis, but we definitely need a lot of these jobs. And going back to the statistics, the 50% of wage earners are making $30,000 or less. These are what those jobs are. You've got your WalMarts and your Lowe's and your McDonald's and stuff like that. So this definitely fits right in our wheelhouse.
So a lot of the residents, I know a lot of them will work retail jobs like Walmart, get paid 20, 30 grand a year, sort of minimum wage. But are any of the residents usually kind of working for that primary employer, like the cat plant or the meat packing plant? I mean, those seems to be a little bit better paying jobs, right?
Yeah, it's always a mix. And as part of what we do on in the acquisition side is we're looking at who are all of the retailers in these areas and where are the jobs. So it's just like anything else. It depends. It varies market to market, but we're always looking for who's employing who, and we never just want one big one. We'd rather have multiple. Even who knows what's going to happen to Walmart 20 years from now, but right now Walmart's employing a lot of people, and same thing with McDonald's. Gas stations are another. That was one of the things my partner Mike had said to me is people who are working at gas stations, whether you're a manager or whether you're just an employee there. I mean, that's those are the folks that live in our communities.
Yeah, and
That's 50% of America, right? That's making that kind of a salary. So
right. I mean, people had a culture shock when you found out you could find $100,000 houses that rent for 1,000. I mean, here's another culture shock here, but this is majority of America right here. I mean,
that's right.
when
That's right.
here's kind of a funny story. When I used to work on the railroad, there was a saying that the guys would say is, they would they would go and wear their orange vests off work because then like the people would say, "Oh, that guy's rich,"
Right.
he's making $50,000 a year. He
Yeah.
works
Yeah.
construction. That's just how it is.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, it's pretty amazing what's happening around the U.S. So here's a little bit more information on Moberly, kind of back to employers and in the markets. Um, Walmart again. So there's a Orscheln, which is a big kind of farm and home. This is the Midwest of America, right? So there's a lot of those kinds of companies out there. Building Supply, Goodyear, GE Financial has a presence there. There's call centers, fulfillment centers, things like that. I think we'll start to see more and more Amazon plants and Amazon presence popping up in some of these markets too. So it's just another way to kind of look at these markets. Um, so a little bit about the transition plan. It's really simple. It's renovate the existing park-owned homes, increase the NOI, bring in new homes. That's a big part of our plan too. In any given market that we operate in, we can typically sell about 2 to 3 brand new homes a month in these markets. Part of it depends on the time of the year. You would think that November, December, January are poor times to sell homes, which is true. So typically, second quarter through fall is probably the best possible time to sell. And since we're in the model where we're selling these homes, which means it's different kind of marketing, and these folks are coming in putting 5 to 10% down, um, we can't sell as many as we could just simply rent. So there's definitely an absorption rate in the market, which is okay. It's just part of our model because again, we want our residents owning the home and not a lot of renters. So, anyways, there's a lot of upside here. Quite a bit of capex and infrastructure, which you had mentioned, which includes the lagoon system. And actually, instead of repairing the lagoon, we're actually going to hook it to city, which is a fairly big expense, but it's a one-time thing. And once you're hook it up to the city, then you're done, and the city is responsible for it. So um, paved roads, that's a big thing. If you're ever refinancing a community, you need paved roads, and you need a large percentage of the community to be paved. And also it's just you're taking a community that started at one point at probably 100%, and years later you're at 40% or something like that. So there's a lot of folks who are still there, and a lot of the morale is down. So just by coming in and doing the work and making repairs and having a presence and spending money in the community is it's such a big deal um, in these areas. And I can't remember if we touched on it, but we kind of have a saying that we're going to go Park Place something, and Park Place, who's our operator in this space. And essentially it's we're not in areas where there's pools or clubhouses and things like that. I mean, it's just, this is not the asset or the demographic. But you can go in and you can put in a community barbecue area, you can go in and put in swing sets, you can put in a handful of these things that at the end of the day don't cost very much. But again, it's we're trying to return the pride of ownership and sense of community to these parks. So a little really goes a long way there.
And so I think the biggest, I mean, there's definitely a lot to do here. Um, picking it up for like $250,000, and guess I don't think we mentioned it, but Andrew already bought the thing, guys. he, he bought it cash, so it's not like this is pipe dream. We've already got the property acquired. Maybe you can kind of talk to about some of the movement that's already been made on it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
but this presentation is kind of to raise the rest, the capex, which we'll need in the future. Already, I think 400,000 or 500,000 is already raised, and this thing hasn't even gone out yet. So I think the total raise is going to be like 1.4 million total. But
Right. Right. Yeah. These things, when as we built our company we essentially created an ecosystem within our company. So meaning we've got a construction company, which is somewhat rare. We have a property management company that's it's a national company that's operating in all these markets. But every time we take over a community, it's more or less the same issues that we're facing. It's how do we put in things as simple as barbecue and swing sets? Well, that's really simple. That's just a line item, and takes a little bit of time and money to do. And some things have bigger issues, like having a lagoon system, or maybe there's some sewer repairs that need to be done. But it took us the better part of last year to partner with some of the Berkshire companies like 21st and Clayton to actually onboard with them. And that was a really long process. And once we've onboarded with them, they have some pretty incredible products and systems in place for operators out there that make it relatively inexpensive to bring in new homes. So the low hanging fruit is we renovate anything that's an older home that can be renovated. Some things need to be scraped and just bring in a new home. And then kind of the phase two in terms of the increasing the occupancy is that we start to bring in new homes. And now with our track record with Clayton and 21st, we can typically order about 8 to 12 homes in any given market or in any given community. It's typically about 2 to 4 months to order, have the home arrive, which means it's literally manufactured, delivered, set, and then sold. And typically they come in staggered. So if you order 6 homes at once, you're not going to, 6 homes don't arrive in one day. But now, because of the relationship we have with these Berkshire companies, we're able to order 6, 8, 10, 12 homes at once, have them come in, and then our marketing department takes over and sells these, so we can get these leased up and sold, and the occupancy up in a pretty quick amount of time. So a lot of that kind of back end stuff has already happened. So again, it's like, we're gonna the lagoon systems. We're gonna turn that into a city, direct to the city, so that's just one less thing to worry about, and then it's just really fixing the infrastructure and filling lots, that's our core business at the company, is filling lots.
Yeah, typically, like, you guys are picking up properties that are like 60% occupied, which seems really low when you compare it to apartments, but that's kind of the status quo for mobile home parks. Obviously, this one's a little bit lower, which is why you're pretty much paying next to nothing. Maybe talk a little bit about the absorption on the vacancy, on some of your track record on that, and how did you pick that number to, hey, we're gonna fill this thing up by or goal to refinance by year 4.
Yeah, typically, in any given market, and just historically at the communities that we own, we feel really comfortable selling 2 homes a month. So just in a 24-month time period, that's 24 homes. That's in really any given community in a market. So it's not across multiple markets. It's really one community. So we feel really good about that number, and we can accelerate that a little bit. We're testing different advertising and things like that. But if we know it conservatively, we run 24 homes in one year, then you simply do the math on this, and in a couple of years, you've put a huge dent in just the occupancy. And the reason for the absorption in these markets, it kind of goes back to really the whole issue with affordable housing. Is these If we were renting everything, we could fill the community so much faster, probably twice as fast. But you're going to have more expenses. You're going to have higher turnover. You're not going to have the kind of community that you ultimately want, where most of the owners own their homes, the residents own their homes. So we'd rather take a little bit more time, fill these communities up with the right residents that own their home, versus renters. So that's really kind of the thought behind it.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, 2 a month kind of a thing. I mean, you ask most apartment owners how they came up with that, and they're like, well, it's a general rule of thumb, and then it's hard to kind of break it down to how you guys have, based on the track record of all the other parks.
And some of it's pretty logical and common sense. You've got, if you're a family, the best time of the year to move is typically summer, right? Who's moving in December? Who's moving in January? Like, not as many people. So, we could have really strong months where we sell 4 or 5 homes, and we may not sell anything in December, or very little in those other months. And we just simply cater our ordering schedule, the new home schedule, around that. So
Yeah, and again, this is not Class A where you build it and you pray that it gets absorbed, which is starting to have a lot of difficulty in like San Francisco and Seattle. This is sort of Class C, Class D, where this thing is, there's a shortage for this kinds of $500 a month housing for folks.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's, you're comparing apples and oranges in terms of, our residents, we're not competing with single family homes. We're really competing with the apartment market. So if you're a family or you're an individual, would you rather live in an apartment, or would you rather live in your own home, without shared walls and, little yard and things like that? So I mean, some people love apartments, and a lot of folks choose not to live in apartments when they know they have an option.
Yeah, and we talked about a lot of like the business model and kind of the process in the other webinars. So if you guys want to check that out, but in short, they're gonna create these pads and with all the utilities, and then to kind of sell the home. In a way, it's kind of like a car dealership in a way.
Well, they're looking at the price tag on this, and someone's going to go in and say, so let me back up. No one is buying these in cash. Like literally, maybe it's 1%, and I doubt it's even that much. So someone's going to go in and buy a $38,000 home, and they're going to need financing, and that's where we have our own financing. We use the Berkshire Company as well, and another lender who's gonna have a 10 to 20 year AM and 5 to 10% down and 7 to 12% terms for the resident, depending on their score. But these folks have a median FICO of five, mid fives, and they're just looking to make sure that they can pay their rent and they've had good job history. So um, they absolutely are not looking at single family houses to buy because they couldn't qualify for it. So it's either they're going to live in an apartment or they're going to live in a manufactured home.
Yeah. So when I was kind of
And
going
all,
over this, when I was going over this deal with Andrew initially, I kind of got over the absorption, and I kind of tracked the numbers to see, yeah, I buy that, by year four, refinance, get that vacancy down to that point. But let's talk about this lagoon thing, because right now that's kind of like there's not very many issues, but that's kind of one of them. Any progress on that, like permits in
yeah,
the area?
absolutely. We're ready to go. Some of the permitting in these smaller towns, these little secondary and tertiary markets, is a slower process. But we've explored both options. One is to repair, and one is to simply convert. And we feel in the long term that a conversion is a um, much better play for us, and it also helps on a sale too. Sometimes when you have a lagoon system, you've got some buyers that are more hesitant, which we look at that as an opportunity, simply because you can convert it to city, and you're now out of that business altogether. So I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but I think it's no more than a 12-month plan to get that converted. A lot of that is just red tape with the city of Moberly, but we've already have bids on it, and we're already in the process. So it's just a matter of time to get that converted.
So the lagoon system's kind of like a septic slash like a settlement pond in a way.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong, but they do there are more costs involved. You typically have fencing around it. I mean, there's probably more cons than pros to it, but you come across something like this, and part of the reason we found such a great deal on this is because there were more problems to solve. So the more problems you can solve, then generally a better deal you're going to get. um, and if we put a bunch of money into the lagoon system and had it repaired, we probably would be great for 5 or 10 years with very little out of pocket. There certainly is a monthly or yearly cost associated with it, but turning this into and converting it to city just solves that problem completely. So
Yeah.
we
What
feel
what
that's
is the what
move.
is that kind of line item to all in the lump sum to convert it to city, and what would it be to like repair off the top of your head?
Yeah, they were both. I think they were both kind of in the $300,000 to $500,000 range. You'd have to go check again, but somewhere in that range, both a repair or a conversion.
Right. So either way, I mean, whether you do one or the other, it's going to get done.
Yeah, great. So let's jump into the deal. So as Lane had mentioned, it's a direct investment. So investors coming in have ownership and equity in the deal. We've structured it with an 8% preferred return, plus 75% of the net cash flow goes to investors. And then there's a 50% split on the equity, whether that's a cash out refinance, which we always plan on doing first. And if for some reason in 4 years from now the rates have gone up and it doesn't make sense to do a refinance, then we simply do a sale by the end of 5 years. And part of that is we found that the sweet spot in a buy and hold scenario is 5 years for our investors, where either through a cash out refinance or a sale, their initial capital is coming back by the end of year 5. Hands down, the best or the most popular exit is a refinance where 100% of their capital, their initial capital account, is coming back to them through a refinance, and then everyone stays in the deal. The investors have the same kind of ownership, so it's almost like a third bite of the apple. You've got your returns that start right away, that are paid out quarterly. Then you have a refinance where your initial capital comes back to you, and then you have a sale at some point. Maybe it's 10 years down the line, depending on when we feel the optimum time to sell is. And that's kind of the third bite of the apple. Again, if the rates have crept up and it doesn't make sense to do a refinance, then it's simply a sale by the end of year 5, where the initial capital comes back, and then 50% of any of the proceeds after that.
Yeah, so I'll kind of repeat this just in a different way, just in case, it's kind of confusing. I admit. So the way the returns are going to work is you're going to get 8% pref. Usually prefs are very skewed towards the LPs because you kind of get that. It's not guaranteed, of course, but you're going to get paid first there. And then they've got it structured where 75% of the remaining cash flow goes to you. And there's a different payout scheme for when an equity or a refinance happens, and that's split at 50-50. So if I'm kind of reading this, I think you're getting a pretty good deal. It's more of a conservative split, because you got the pref there, which is nice, and then you're getting the lion's share of the cash flow. I think this type of payout scheme it really puts Andrew and Mike on the hot seat to get it going, because that's how they're going to get paid essentially.
Yeah, and the pref is there. It's exactly what you had said. It's really there to protect the investor and make sure that the net cash flow coming out from a deal is going to go to the investors first. And anything that doesn't come out, we're projecting that first year this will not hit the pref, because we're buying an asset at a lower occupancy, but that pref accrues. So the investor is going to see that 8%, whether it's the first year, second year, or third year, or it all accrues back to a sale or a refinance. So just like you said, it's never guaranteed, it's not fixed, but the net cash flow that comes out that first 8% will go to the investors first.
So is the pref not written into the first year? It starts at year 2 then?
No, it is written into the first year, and so that year 2 accounts for the makeup of the first year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because
So it accrues. So it carries over to year 2.
Okay. Well, better for the LPs, because sometimes you'll see it where there's 8% pref, but they'll write it in there. Oh, it's not starting to year 2 or year 3.
Yeah. I think when you're maybe in a new construction model or some sort of a development model, that's not uncommon. But in our world, it typically starts in year 1 and then will accrue.
Yeah, and kind of interesting here, with the apartments, usually you're not seeing cash flow for the first couple quarters, but you guys are going to pay out dividends first quarter?
Yeah,
Very
and
small, obviously.
we say 1 to 2 quarters it'll start, and it really depends. In this model, we're talking about just under 3% the first year, so that's annualized. But typically, when there's money to distribute, it's going to happen the first quarter or 2.
Yeah, and then the next question everybody asks is like, is this going to be a long-term deal, or is this going to be a pump and dump in 5? I think the answer is it's going to be more of a legacy hold. Assuming refinance at year 4, at that point you're kind of in infinite returns at that
That's
point.
right. Yeah.
So that's kind of why things skyrocket, and you can imagine year 6. If I were to kind of interpolate the numbers, you're well over 20% a year, every year for the first 6, definitely over 7. Then it just kind of skyrockets from there. But I think we put this together just because wanted to compare it with apartments, and it's hard to compare apples to oranges, but this was our little attempt to do it.
Yeah, and back to the refinance. I mean, for us, that's that's a home run for everyone because you return capital typically faster, and generally, a lot of our investors, especially the ones who are in two, three, four, five projects with us, generally they're going to reinvest with us or put that and diversify into something else. But now they've got their money off the table. They still have ownership. They still have cash flow. I mean, obviously, when you take an asset that's 100% equity without any debt, and you go put debt on that and you return the equity to investors, your cash flow is going to be less, but the ownership remains the same. And there's a lot of people with a school of thought of, well, if I put $100,000 into something, and 4 years later, along with distributions, my money's back, and now I can put that into another deal and still be getting cash flow, like the infinite return model. That's a big win for them.
Right. And I think it's a good idea to kind of be doing both, some 5-year pump and dump deals, and then some are like this where you're kind of in it for the long term. And, when you cash everybody out with refi, a lot of that's kind of, it's not ordinary income.
Right. Right. So I think let's just take a look here. So we talked about this a little bit. The returns are quarterly. We talked about the exits, and then just back if we're in a refinance scenario, we may decide to hold that asset for another 5 years or 4 years or 7 years. There's no real defined exit once 100% of the capital account is back to the investors. It's just really when we feel the best time to sell.
Yeah. And at this point it's anybody's guess, right? But what is your kind of intention that's kind of going around in your head right now, Andrew? And when people are asked, like, hey, I want to make future plans in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, where is this one going to be at conservatively? Are we still going to be holding on to it, or?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I'm a buy and hold investor. My partner has the same mentality. I mean, we feel if we can bring in LPs or limited partners, we can get them out of the deal in terms of their capital with distributions along the way, and then we hold something long term. It's a big win for everyone. We don't really want to be in the business of buying and selling. But we also know that investors don't want their capital to be held up for indefinitely. So we feel like it's kind of the best of both worlds. If the rates are still great in 4 years, then a cash out refinance is the best possible scenario. If they're not, and it's just simply a sale, well, that's fine. We may have another fund that comes in and buys it at market value, or maybe it's just a sale to the open public, but the open market. But either way, we want our investors' capital coming back within that 5-year term. I think that's really it on kind of the overview here. And Lane, any other questions that anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, just obviously the going to get a cost segregation done. Investors are going to be owning a piece of the LLC. I forget what we're calling it, Moberly MHP LLC, or it was on the first slide. But you're going to own a piece of that. You're going to get your share of the distributions and depreciation. That cost segregation is going to speed up the clock for depreciation. And maybe explain it to me a little bit. It's a little bit quicker depreciation cycle than apartments, right? Apartments is like on a 39, and this is seen as something different, like equipment.
Yeah. So with mobile home communities, so I guess the backing up a little bit, we bought a few communities in Tennessee last year, and we bought them in October. They were at 80 something percent occupancy. Closed in October, which is obviously the beginning of quarter four. Quarter one of 2018, this first part of this year, we made our first distribution. I think the first distribution was 8 or 9% to the investors, and that all of that cash flow from 2017 was 100% tax free. That's not an indication that 100% of all of the income or all of the distributions will be tax free, but we expect a fairly large portion of that in terms of a distribution. And the reason that happens is, back to our model, the residents own their homes, and these are technically their chattel loans, which means when you've got a single family home or an apartment building, you have a longer depreciation schedule. It's completely different for this model. So we're depreciating things like roads and infrastructure and lighting and anything that essentially has a price tag on it that needs to be renovated or repaired or replaced over time. So you can get pretty creative, very legally with this stuff and with this asset class. So I think that conservatively we say 20 to 50% is going to be tax free in terms of the quarterly distributions moving forward, and we've already seen that and more. But typically we try to run everything as conservative as possible.
Yeah. So I'll kind of let you go early, and I'll kind of go over the next step forwards. But thanks for dropping in on your Saturday. I know your things are a little chaotic at home there. Moving.
Saturdays are great. Less phone calls, right?
Yeah, yeah. But thanks, Andrew. And if you guys are interested, shoot me an email at lane@simplepassivecashflow.com, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Great. Thanks, Lane.
Okay. Bye. So I hope you guys enjoyed those couple segments with Andrew. And just to wrap things up and next steps moving forward, in terms of my own investing, I've been trying to sell off my single family homes here in the last year. I think at this point, I've currently got like 5 left. So out of the 11 I started with, I'm about halfway through. So my idea is I'm trying to trade these single family homes into syndications, and I'm probably about 7 or 8 deals, I think, so far. So I'm kind of halfway through this, and I think this is a chart that I kind of started a while back ago, where I kind of outlined all the different asset classes and ways of investing out there on this chart, where on the bottom you've got the low to high risk, and on the y-axis you've got the different returns. Of course, this is all very general, and don't take my word for it. Private money lending there is at around 10% plus or minus a few percent points, but some of these have a little bit wider spread on. But this is basically the general landscape of things. And thus far I've played around with multifamily, non-recourse syndication, turnkey rentals, single family homes. Of course, we've all kind of done these things on the bottom, below that line of you can do better, which are stocks, mutual funds, money markets. There's AHP. There it used to be 12%. Now they're giving out 10%, which is that's, as an investment becomes more institutionalized, that's just what kind of happens. The returns get lower. Different options for investing, but mobile home parks. The question is, where does this fall in? And I would say it's very similar to this multifamily non-recourse syndication. I mean, the returns are right around 20% or so, plus or minus, another percent points up and down. And I do believe it's a lower risk. In particular, this investment is not using any leverage. The park is already purchased for almost $250,000. It's already done, and that transaction is closed. It's just the absorption of the property, and the Four Peaks has got the track record to kind of show for that they can absorb those units at 2 a month. About. And when you combine it with the fact that it's that Class C housing, in a recession, you always ask what's going to happen. Well, I mean, the demand for these types of housing is going to go up, and it's an asset class that they're not going to be making any more of. And what I'm trying to do these days with my personal portfolio is get into investments that cash flow, because I think we talked about refinance year 4 and get these returns by year 7, 8. But if there's a recession, the timelines kind of take a pause, and as an investor, you kind of want to hedge yourself, and the way you hedge yourself is with that cash flow. And I feel like with mobile home parks, the cash flow is just a little bit stronger. Now, I don't know. I'm just speculating that maybe it's just because it's not as a crowded space, um, not too many, just a fraction amount of investors doing mobile home parks as single family homes or apartments. So maybe that's partly what it is. But it's a niche. So here's that other chart that I kind of showed at one time, and I revised it a little bit here for you folks. But you're starting out as an investor, you're getting these turnkey rentals, and if you're a high net worth individual, you may be going right to the syndications. But you try your hand at these Class B and Class C syndications, ideally using non-recourse loans. You might throw in one of those coffee farms in there, and if you want more information on that, simplepassivecashflow.com/coffee. But that mobile home parks fits right in here. I mean, at the base of this pyramid, in my opinion. I still like apartments. Don't get me wrong, but there's just a lot more syndications out there with apartments, and just a lot of them are just kind of sucker deals, in my opinion. It takes kind of an expert to kind of look through and pull the real P&Ls, the rent rolls, and kind of make a own determination, and not just go off of how big is someone's social media following and something like that. Oh, by the way, I updated that little image on the left side. I call that, if you guys know, I don't really carry too much cash on hand. I get kind of anxious when I have too much liquidity, and I call this liquidity anxiety. So I kind of keep 50 to 100 grand in an on deck circle, not in my checking account, but through HP, and I use my life insurance banking. If you guys are interested in that, shoot me a line. I'm in the process of recording a webinar for that one too. But as you start to build the base of the pyramid, now you kind of step up to a little more higher risk, higher return stuff. But in the grand scheme of thing, I think the mobile home park syndications and even apartment investments are a little bit lower risk, lower return. And partly because of that is the cash flow that you're getting paid quarterly. And here's that image that I made here that I call it, instead of your grandpa's CD ladder, your father's CD ladder, I'm trying to build a syndication ladder. So next steps, if you're interested in this investment, again, the cool thing about this one is not using any leverage, so you don't have to worry about that UDFI tax on the leverage portion. So I think this is the time to start using your self-directed IRAs and gobble this stuff up. These mobile home investments. When I talk to Andrew, most of his stuff goes in the fund, and it's very rare that it's a direct investment like this. They said they probably only do one or two of these a year, if that. And he kind of gave me, we kind of are exclusive partners on this one. So this will likely be the only one this year, and who knows if any is going to come out where it's a direct investment like this, not like a blind pool. And sometimes he'll use leverage too on mobile home parks, but we know with apartments, I would say the vast majority are using leverage on those. So again, no leverage means use your self-directed IRA. So if you got money in that, not doing anything, I'd say this is a good opportunity to dump some money with that into this investment. Investment minimum is 50,000, and we're accepting non-accredited and accredited investors. Again, first come, first serve, priority given to higher amounts. IRA money is okay, and non-accredited folks, make sure you have a relationship with myself. This is kind of where we talk about, building a relationship. I got to understand your guys' personal situations. Getting to a point where I can kind of select and choose investors who I want. And so the next step is to fill out the investor interest form that you got through the email. Look through that. It should take you a couple minutes to fill out. And then shoot me an email at lane@simplepassivecashflow.com if you don't see anything in the next couple of days. The next steps was I'll connect you with our admin who's going to walk you through the steps, and we're going to do this one via e-sign. So, no printing out pages, just going to e-sign it, the PPM, and then we'll work to get you the wire instructions. And just a public service announcement on wiring funds. And this is kind of, I've heard stories. This has never happened to me, but I guess you just got to be careful with those wire instructions, because there's a bunch of email scams out there where people will hack your email account and then swap out those wiring instructions. A lot of time the wire instructions will come in as a PDF or separate attachment, or even in email text. So these guys will kind of swap that out. So just something to be aware of. Track the fund. That's why we try. And when you send in the funds, it's always a good idea to shoot me an email and say, "Hey, I just sent the money off. It came from this account," because a lot of you guys are using these strange trusts, or you guys have different names that is your real name. That it's hard to figure out whose is whose. But if we catch it early, it's pretty simple to resolve. So just to be aware of that. And yeah, like I said, just fill out the form and shoot me an email to follow up within the next couple days or so. And if you guys have any questions, shoot me an email at lane@simplepassivecashflow.com. Maybe if we get enough questions, I'll send it out to everybody. But if not, yeah, this one should go pretty quick. And try and move on this quickly, guys. And please communicate your interests. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.